ideology that came about was the ideology that Napoleon had started of nationalism. Which hadn't been seen in Europe in a long time, but the idea that, hey, I'm a Frenchman, so I'm for France first, or another person say, I'm Spanish, I'm for Spain first, where you loved your nation more than you, you might say even more than you did your church, with your nationalism. Where that you were proud of being what you are, and you were for your country. About at the same time, an American hero said, for our country, right or wrong, which basically, the man's name was Stephen Decatur, and he said, for our country, right or wrong, right about this time. We're going to, we're for our country no matter how right or how wrong it is. Nationalism. All right, now I did say that there was a lot of, I mean, Europe went through 99 years of relative peace, but it was interrupted by a few revolutions and a few wars. There were some war. I mean, mankind has never found a cure for war. But some of the biggest fights that occurred in Europe in the 1800s were revolutions. There were revolutions in 1830, 1832, and 1848. All three of these revolutions had one thing in common. They always began in France. France had started the revolution in 1792. The revolution began in France and then spread from there to Austria. I mean, some of them spread into Russia. Now, there was one nation that did not have a revolution, and that country was Great Britain. Why was Great Britain spared? Well, one reason was Great Britain was prosperous during most of this time. Another reason was Great Britain passed the Reform Act of 1832. I'm jumping around a little bit. The Reform Act of 1832 put all the power in the hands of the House of Commons. Britain kept its monarchy, but the monarch was reduced to almost nothing, no authority, whatever. But they did keep their monarchy, and they have it to this day. And they kept their House of Lords, but the House of Lords has no authority, whatever. But the Reform Act of 1832 put all the power in the hands of the House of Commons. And the real power was in the hands of the Prime Minister, not the King or Queen. And this is still going on to this day. And Britain, unlike the United States, Britain can change its government anytime. They can call for elections whenever they please. Not like our Constitution, we have an election every even numbered year, and every 4 years have a presidential election. The British can call for a vote of no confidence and throw out their Prime Minister, which they do every once in a while. Reform Act of 1832, and a lot of people believe this was what kept Britain from having the revolutions that you see in the rest of Europe. Yes?
So what is the reason that they keep the monarchy as they are, and they just kind of...
All right. Folks,
you can give me the short version.
A short answer, in one word, tradition. The answer that we were, when we asked my 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Conley by name, that question, she said, it's tradition. They just want to keep their old nobility. They want to keep the idea of a monarchy. They just like to have a queen and king because they've always had one. I mean, they read about their kings and queens of time past. They read about King Henry VIII, King William the Conqueror, and they want to think that, you know, we still have one today. And the present queen is a descendant of these men. Not Henry VIII, he had no descendants, but descended from his sister.
And the wealth that these people have, is it the family wealth, or is that nation obligated to facilitate the
It's wealth that the queen was able to build up family wealth. She was in a position to do so. For many years, she wouldn't pay taxes. But they finally convinced her, Your Majesty, you've got to pay taxes. She said, my ancestors never did. It's just a different world. She finally started paying taxes. But anyway, I mean, if we were exempt from taxes, I mean, it's amazing how much wealth we might have built up too. But a lot of that is wealth that she has built up. And a few years back, one of her castles caught fire. It was going to cost $900,000 to fix it, and the government started to move in. Some people rose up and said, no, no, she's the richest woman in the world, ever fixing out her own pockets. And she wound up fixing out her own pocket rather than at government expense. But they have problems that way. I mean, what does she charge the government for, and what does she get to have to pay for herself? She was not always as rich as she is now. But it's tradition. Now, that's the one answer. There is another one for you. I'm going to tell it. They believe that when Jesus Christ comes back, the King of England is going to lay his crown at his feet. So they want to have a king and queen, so that Queen Elizabeth once told an American, yes, when he comes, I'm going to lay the crown of England at his feet. That's religion. But again, you won't hardly hear any other teacher in college say that, particularly at a state college. But nevertheless, it's there. Now, there have been moves on to get rid of the queen. They say we don't need it anymore. We don't need her anymore. Particularly when Prince Charles started going astray, they said we don't need. We'll let her finish out her reign as queen. When she's gone, we'll let her son and grandson take over.
Are they a Catholic?
They're Protestant. Yeah, Protestant still. Okay. But anyway, back to revolutions. They started in France and spread. The Revolution of 1830 did not overthrow the monarchy of King Louis Philippe, who had become king at this time. But the Revolution of 1832 finally did. Karl Marx watched these revolutions unfold, and he said, hey, they're on the right track, but just a little bit more. These revolutions, by the way, all basically failed. And after they were over with, a more autocratic, and again that word autocratic, in other words, they were replaced with governments that were even more firm and more hard than they had been before, because the powers that be felt like, well, they have nothing to do, or they're going to rebel, so we've just got to deal with them with a more firm hand. So the result was a more autocratic form of government. Now, about a year ago, a movie came out called Les Miserables. Did any of you happen to see it, Les Miserables? Yeah, that was about the Revolution of 1830. A fairly true account about a young person who died fighting for what he believed. And the saying they had was, every man a king. If we win this revolution, we'll all be crowned as rich as kings. They were, I guess you might say they were fooling themselves. But anyway, the year 1848 has been known as the year of revolutions, because revolution occurred, just broke out all over the place, beginning, of course, in France. And the Revolution of 1848 actually overthrew the last French king, and Napoleon's nephew took over the throne, and he called himself Napoleon III. He had tried to take over the government before, but this time he found an opening. He came in and he took over, and he believed that he could succeed where his uncle had failed. He called himself the third because he said that when Napoleon first died, his son had been Napoleon II, even though Napoleon II never had any authority and never got to be crowned. He said Napoleon's son was Napoleon II, so I am Napoleon III. So he was to govern France from 1848 until 1870, some 22 years. Oh yeah, the revolution also spread into Italy. And the Italians were able to put it down just like the rest of Europe had. I must say, when the revolution finally succeeded in 1917, the first revolution that really, you might say, actually overthrew the government and took over was the Communist Revolution of 1917. It was the classic example of where they replaced the Tsar and got Lenin and Stalin. And they might have been better off under the Tsars. I can't say the revolutions made them better. Okay, the Ottoman Empire.